So I'm back filming a video after I think it's like 2 months since my last one, but I've been busy. But life slowed me down by giving me a sprained ankle, which gave me the perfect time to watch Blonde, because it's 3 hours long, and that's 3 hours of my life gone. Blonde, or as I call it, Daddy Issues, the art house movie. Because, crazy ladies be having those daddy issues that explain their whole entire lives. I did not care for it. I think it's probably going to get Oscar buzz because it's about Hollywood and about Hollywood being bad, and Anna D. Is it Armas?
Yeah, Anna de Armas being sad.
Yeah, it was 3 hours of her being miserable, but also like undergoing a huge transformation, which Hollywood loves. So I think she's probably going to get some Oscar buzz. If you were doing a biopic of Marilyn Monroe, she works really, really well, because what Marilyn Monroe's strength as an actress was always her comedic talent. Like, people say that she was a bad actress, but in terms of comedy, timing, reactions, expressiveness, like, she just had it. And Ana de Armas has that as well. She's got a great comedic sensibility. But it's certainly not being used in this movie. Do you want me to go through the plot, or go through what I hated?
Let's start with an overview of the plot. Is it just Marilyn's entire life, or what?
No, it's sections from her life. In fact, the bits they omitted from her life I felt were more telling than the bits they included. So it opens. She is. I have to do quick math. 7 years old, and her mother is mentally ill and abusive. So it opens up on a scene of essentially her mother abusing her. Setting the tone early on. Her mother goes crazy, tries driving into a California wildfire, and then tries to drown Marilyn, Norma Jean. Sorry, she's Norma Jean at this point, in a bathtub. And luckily, Norma Jean escapes, goes to a neighbour's house, and is like, "My mum's trying to kill me, can you help us?" And she gets taken to an orphanage, which is a bit traumatic for her, because she's not an orphan, because her mother has spent her entire life saying that her father is a big important movie star and he's going to come back for her someday, some way, somehow. And she's just like, if you contact my father, he'll get me. I'm not an orphan. Scene cut, and now she's an adult. And
yeah, I remember that being in the TV series. I think they made that part up, didn't they?
Her mother did have significant mental health problems and did spend time in an asylum. That's why.
No, I mean the bit about her father.
So, Norma Jean Marilyn Monroe did not know her father in real life. Her mum worked for a movie studio and got pregnant outside of wedlock. Now, Norma Jean, the real person, did have this fixation on Clark Gable as a father figure, which is interesting in terms of this movie, because that doesn't go anywhere. But what you need to know from the first 20 or so minutes from this movie is that despite her mother trying to kill her, literally trying to kill her, Marilyn's life is dictated by her daddy issues. She has no issues with her mother or like other women. In fact, other women don't feature in this movie. This movie is only interested in her relationships with men. Just as a astounding coincidence, not that you could have noticed by anything that happens in this film. This movie was written by a man and directed by a man, based on a book by a woman. I haven't read the book, so I can't speak about that. But Sure, could have been more interesting if this was scripted and directed by a woman, but nevertheless. So it smashes to Norma Jean is now an adult woman trying to break into Hollywood, and she has a sugar daddy who she calls daddy, and she gets raped by a studio head to get her first part. You see this. I'm like, okay. I don't know whether I needed to see this. It doesn't feel so much a commentary on Me Too, as in like, hey, the film industry is bad. And I'm like, okay. And she gets her. It's presented as her first movie role, which is in Don't Bother to Knock, which is a psychological thriller. Even though Marilyn Monroe in real life had been working consistently, I think for about 7, 8 years in bit parts and extras and like rising up through the ranks. Like she was in All About Eve for God's sake, but no, for the purposes of this movie, everyone thinks she's a terrible actress, and the only way she can get anywhere is by being raped. And then at I think an acting studio, like a workshop place. There aren't like places aren't consistently like identified or anything like that because it's an art house movie. It's an aesthetic. It has an aesthetic. It's like a dream. And she meets the sons of like two famous actors. One of them is Charlie Chaplin Jr., technically Charlie Chaplin III because Charlie Chaplin was Charlie Chaplin Jr., and some other guy who fucking cares about him. And she ends up in a polyamorous relationship with them. These two men who have like Ken doll faces and completely no characterization other than we hate our father and you are lucky for you have no father. Remember,
Daddy issues.
Marilyn has daddy issues. Sorry, Norma Jean. I'm being specific because she's Norma Jean. Marilyn Monroe is the persona. That's a theme in the movie. And she's on this date with both these gorgeous guys, and she's watching herself on the screen, and she's like, "But I'm Norma, and I don't know who that is. That's Marilyn." And at that point, I started thinking, okay, my cat is destroying things. Okay, so one theme is daddy issues. The other, another middle theme is Hollywood bad. And the other theme is that Norma Jean the person was destroyed by Marilyn the persona.
Right.
But my problem with that is that if that's the story that they're getting at, that she was fame destroyed her and she was eaten up by this persona that she couldn't control, why does she behave the same outside of the persona as when she is in the persona? Because it uses a change in aspect ratio to tell you when she's being Marilyn and when she's being Norma, but her behavior between the two scenes is completely the same.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've listened to audio tapes of the real Marilyn Monroe, she doesn't necessarily sound like Marilyn Monroe when she was, Robin, he's climbing in a box, when she was talking to, her real life friends and colleagues and people that she interacted with. It was something that she turned on, that she became Marilyn. That wasn't who she was as a real person. But in this film, that's dead. That's played dead straight. She just behaved like that in real life, according to this film. This version of Marilyn Monroe, who is breathy, vulnerable, constantly a victim, and who has no basic understanding of the world around her. She's like, oh, Daddy, I can't quite find where I'm supposed to act. Everyone thinks I'm horrible. And I'm like, but if the story is that this persona destroyed Norma Jean, why is she just doing that all the time? But anyway, I digress. She gets pregnant by one of her polyamory Ken dolls, And it's bad because she has to star in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, a movie that is being written specifically for her. So she has an abortion, and then that's terrible because when she watches the movie, and in an example of the sparkling dialogue of this movie, she's there watching Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which is a great film. It's a good film, and you've got this woman and she's sat there and she's going, "I killed my baby for this," and I'm like, well, in terms of keeping a career and like making it in this industry that you've worked really, really hard to succeed in. Okay, and then like the fetus has conversations with her because like it's sad.
Yeah, I heard like they have a scene from the point of view of the fetus or something.
It's sad that its mummy killed it. Because obviously, a 27-year-old single woman in 1953 could have just been like, "Hey, I'm pregnant. Also, I'm in a relationship with two men at the same time. We're not getting married. I hope you're cool with it." And she's sad, but she meets then the ex-athlete, because in a conceit carried over from the book, no one from Marilyn's life is given their real name for reasons, because the book wasn't actually about Marilyn Monroe. It was like a thought experiment about Marilyn Monroe and blah, 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 blah. Whatever. I'm uninterested in your pretense. And she's like, "Oh, Daddy, it would just make me so happy if I could be your little baby." And I'm like, bleh, bleh. Gross. This is gross. Who decided this was a good idea, or like a reasonable psychological evaluation of a traumatized person? But she runs full ahead into marrying him, which is at the point I was like, hey, are they ever going to address the fact that she was sexually abused as a child? But no, that that was abuse against a child, and that isn't sexy abuse, because she marries Joe DiMaggio and she doesn't fit in with his life. She goes to see his family, and there's a scene of Marilyn Monroe, civil rights activist, political agitator, great spokeswoman and promoter of American literature, going, "Oh my gosh, you can make pasta? I thought you only bought spaghetti at the store." And I'm like, if Marilyn is the persona, why is she?
Yeah, she wasn't actually a dumb blonde in real life.
Your one of your three stated themes is exploring how this blonde identity ended up destroying her, but it was a creation. But you're not. But you're playing it straight. You're playing it completely straight. Well, anyway, she's married to Joe DiMaggio, but guess what? He's abusive, and you get this really awful scene of him coming back to the house after discovering that she's done nude photography, and she's just there, naked, lying around completely naked. Like ladies do, as I frequently myself do, lie around naked reading a book just in the hopes of a man coming past and seducing me. And then he starts beating her, and she's just naked throughout the whole scene because, I mean, hey, our theme is about how Marilyn Monroe's body was exploited by fame, so, gotta show them titties, I guess. Which, I'm not being disrespectful to Anna de Armas and her decisions, but it's a level of nudity that becomes more and more gratuitous over the course of the film, where the case is just, why is this happening? But they end up getting divorced because he then beats her some more because she does the 7-year itch with the big, the dress scene, the famous scene, and he's like, "You're a whore," and she's like, "Daddy, no, you can't beat your baby, Daddy." And I'm like, bleh. Gross. And then she moves to New York and she meets Arthur Miller. Well, the playwright. You know, it's artsy. And now she's finally happy because she's finally with a man who recognizes her intellect. And you can tell that she's intellectual because she mentions one play by Chekhov. The film never goes into her politics or, you know, her activism or anything like that because, you know, that would
not
be
be sexy.
that would be empowering. And you've got to remember this is a 3-hour movie about how she can't be a girl boss. Marilyn Monroe was only ever a victim of the system. You know, there was never anything else in her life other than being victimized, abused, and exploited. She never had, I don't know, her own production company. She never negotiated her own salaries. She didn't have friends. Friends? Who needs friends? She was never one of the first students of method acting. No. She's just miserable and abused her whole life. And then you get like a 15-20 minute segment of the film where she's finally happy because she's married to Arthur Miller and they have a wonderful idyllic life in a farmhouse and she's like, Daddy, I'm finally so happy, and she gets pregnant. But oh no, that Marilyn, she's pregnant and in possibly like the worst pregnancy loss scene I've ever seen. Like, let me break it down for you. So, Arthur Miller's friends have arrived at the house, and she's just really shy because they're so clever, and she's a woman who doesn't know that spaghetti can be made by people. So she's preparing like a platter of crudités to take down to the beach, and like Arthur Miller goes running off ahead of her to like greet her friends, his friends, and then she's walking along with this tray so carefully, and then somehow she trips over the one sand bump on the whole beach, and she goes flying, crashing forward, smack, and lands directly on her belly, and you're like, oh no, baby! And this causes instant miscarriage in a scene that I questioned because the blood started like forming over her stomach in like an artistic way, and I'm going, it wouldn't appear at the front of her dress, it would appear at the back of her dress. And then she's like, oh no, baby, I killed my baby. Even though in real life Marilyn Monroe had, I think, really, really chronic endometriosis and ectopic pregnancies, which is why she had a number of miscarriages. It wasn't that, oopsie, she's just so stupid that she fell over the one bump on the beach. It was that she had chronic medical conditions. It also impacted on her ability to work because she had incredibly severe period pains. She took a lot of medications to manage it. She had a lot of scar tissue, and which fed into her drug problems. But, you know, that would have been something, you know, that she couldn't be blamed for, because then you get hard cut, like the baby like fades away in like art house CGI, and then she's on set of Some Like It Hot, and she's doing the scene on the train where Sugarcane is breaking the big lump of ice, and she's talking about how careless she is, and she says, I'm just so careless. Careless? And then she goes on this screaming rant at Billy Wilder about making her think about her being careless as a mother. How dare he make her think this because she lost her baby? And I'm like, but she wasn't careless. She had she had an ectopic pregnancy. It was the late 1950s. What could be done to manage an ectopic pregnancy at that time period? So you've got her like having this full-on drug-addled breakdown because her character is being portrayed as careless and as a joke on her, and she can't handle it because she should be a mother. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, yes, the production of Some Like It Hot was really troubled because the real-life Marilyn Monroe had a miscarriage in the middle of filming, but she had a miscarriage because she had an ectopic pregnancy. not because she fell over in the world's stupidest beach accident. For the purposes of our narrative, the babies that she's lost or like killed in order to have a career, because they're all ganging up on her, and then Arthur Miller vanishes. He just vanishes from the movie. Like, you guess that they've had to divorce because now she has drug problems. But what I was interested in was that, I've said that a lot, is that it completely misses over the filming of The Misfits, which was one of her last substantial film roles. It was a film written for her by Arthur Miller because she had a production company and she wanted to do more dramatic roles. She didn't want to be doing the same comedic fluff that she'd always done. And he wrote a film for her so that she could have her father figure of choice, Clark Gable, in a starring role. And Marilyn Monroe did the production, she organised the costumes, she helped write the scripts because she didn't think the story was. And it became this big thing because Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe's marriage was breaking down because he kept using bits from their personal life in his writing, and she didn't like that, and she was having problems from drug use and from her constant period pain and men and gynecological problems, and everything was falling apart. But the film completely misses that. This film about daddy issues completely skips over the time that she worked with the man that she considered her father figure, presumably because in this scenario she's not a victim of men, she was a victim of her own body. And we had to have Arthur Miller be a fucking sympathetic figure. Marilyn was the problem. Smash cut to 1962, and Marilyn is now a full-blown drug addict, being blasted across America at the whims of JFK, who she's having an affair with and who she believes that they are souls met on an astral plane. You have no idea how they met or why he thinks this is a good idea, because this fictionalized version of Marilyn Monroe is a fucking mess and could not be trusted to keep an illicit affair discreet. But everyone always says they had an affair, so you got to include that, and how she's being used and abused by JFK. And there's this extended scene of her giving him a blowjob while he's on the phone doing presidential stuff. And it's like, okay, why is this happening? And she's like, oh, I can't vomit on him. And I'm like, okay, right, okay. And I swear it's only included because famously there is a film of Marilyn Monroe giving someone a blowjob. It was sold at auction, I think, about 10 years ago. Obviously, you've got to include that because that's a thing that really happened and how her image was exploited, as we do exactly the same thing without a hint of irony. And then he beats her in the face because, Marilyn is abused by men. She doesn't get a chance to be happy. And then it's either a drug-fueled fantasy, or it's meant to really happen, but she's also pregnant with JFK's baby, and the FBI break into her villa in Los Angeles and abduct her and give her an abortion, and then drop her off in her bed again. And then she walks around her house naked and covered in blood because and she's just so alone and she's miserable, and there's nothing in life. Marilyn has consumed her entirely. And then the big twist. The twist! So throughout the film, she's been getting letters from her tearful father. Her long lost father is writing to her and communicating with her, and she never gets to meet him, but she knows that he's out there thinking of her because, you know, she's a woman who's nearly 40, whose life is entirely dependent on behaving like a child and waiting for her father to come home. And she gets a call from one of the Ken doll polyamory twins saying the other one has died, and he had a box that he wanted for her to have, and it's going to arrive to her house. And like the delivery boy comes to the house and she signs it Marilyn Monroe because, you know, there's nothing of Norma Jean left. And she opens the box and it's a card
And it's all
saying,
daddy letters.
yes, because he was doing it all along. And this
He was the daddy.
He was the daddy. And this makes Marilyn so upset. She just can't handle the fact that actually she has no daddy. There's no daddy waiting to look after her because all women.
In real life, they're not actually sure whether it was suicide or like a accidental overdose because she was taking so many pain pills.
Yeah, she was taking a lot of.
Like her actual pain.
And then Ana de Armas, naked, takes a big pill overdose, positions herself in the exact position Marilyn Monroe's body was found, and this was filmed in the exact room where she died, because, you know, the other films, the pop culture exploits Marilyn Monroe's image, not our film. And then she dies hallucinating the chance to finally meet her father in heaven. The end.
I have a thought about like so like the sexual abuse but make it sexy thing, which you see in a lot of films. It's just kind of like, oh, but we have to show this to, you know, to see how like real and gross it is, but we also kind of want it to be titillating.
Yeah. You know, we are showing you how
I know sexual abuse is a sort of difficult thing to portray or to like figure out how to portray in films, but like I think a lot of them do this kind of like, you know, it's bad but it's sexy.
Yeah, you know, pop culture has exploited Marilyn Monroe's body, but we're not doing that. Even though when we're portraying graphic scenes of her being abused by men with Ana de Armas just naked, but we're not exploiting her body or her sexual identity at all. So you're clear. That's not what we're doing. Even though there is absolutely no reason for her to be naked, other than, I guess, naked equals vulnerable. But I already know that she's vulnerable because you keep beating me over the head with how vulnerable she is and just how fragile and wispy and how she can't take care of herself. And I'm like, she grew up impoverished in the social care system in Los Angeles. I have to believe that the real life Marilyn Monroe had a backbone of fucking steel because she got through that and made it look effortless. This version of Marilyn Monroe couldn't say boo to a bloody goose. She's just, you know, it's a psychological horror depicting the impact of fame and how it eroded her real persona. And I'm like, what real persona? This real persona of this pathetic baby woman who can't do a single thing for herself unless she has an approval of a daddy. Like, I hope the original book wasn't this, because it feels like just degrading that you're
because I've seen the TV show that was also based off the book, I think, and like that was less like explicit, I suppose, but I do remember it being annoying me with how like spineless they made Marilyn seem.
And I read all the reviews before I watched it because I didn't know whether I wanted to watch it, because 3 hours of watching a woman get abused is a lot.
Mm.
And I'm like, what are they seeing that I'm not? I don't see this as poignant and heartbreaking. I'm watching a woman who was already broken just get more and more and more broken. It doesn't feel like an interesting examination of the impact of fame and trauma, just that she was always broken and nothing was ever going to fix her. She was just a victim from the start, and people who go through trauma are just going to destined to be victims their whole lives, and everyone is going to be horrible to them and exploit them and take advantage of them. And we've also made that seem even worse because we've taken away all the aspects of Marilyn Monroe's real life where she ever had control over herself, ever had dignity, ever had any kind of agency, because we want you to know that this is a serious movie about how Hollywood exploits women. You know, you're a victim if you are already a victim.
Maybe it's a thing of like, we can only feel sympathy for you as a victim if you're like, if that's all you are. Like, you can't be a sort of, especially with women, I think it's a kind of like, you can't be a woman who stands up for herself but also is victimized in certain circumstances.
How can
because then we wouldn't have any sympathy for you.
How can woman be victim if woman in control?
How can a woman be victim if woman bitch?
If woman enjoy career, then woman equal bitch, and bitch equal not able to be abused. So she's just this. She doesn't even feel like a character. No one in this movie feels like a character. They're just sort of props that are propelled by the inertia of this meandering plot. Because I mentioned it's 3 hours. It's 3 hours.
And why are movies always 3 hours now? No film needs to be 3 hours long, unless you're Lord of the Rings.
I guess because
but this is not Lord of the Rings.
No. I guess because the book was really long, but just because a book is long doesn't mean that a film has to be long. But Norma Jean doesn't have a character arc. She's just this figurehead that gets buffeted around from act to act, from action to action, from action to action, having no control over anything that ever happens to her until, like, the only time she can control herself is when she decides to kill herself because, oh gosh, daddy's just not coming. And while the book was written by a woman, I can't help but feel that a female director or screenwriter would have had a much more interesting take, because it just feels really reductive. She was stupid and looking for a daddy her whole life. She calls all her male sexual partners daddy because that's the role that she wants them to go in. And I'm like, really? Daddy issues is a joke online because it's such a stupidly reductive way to sum up a person's psyche. Let's go back to the fact that there aren't any female characters in this film. But no, there are no women characters in this movie, because then you might have to discuss her relationship with her mother. And her mother, hang on, I'm just rearranging because my knee has gone to sleep. Mother does appear again when she's an adult, but she's in a mental hospital, so that doesn't go anywhere. But the only time that Marilyn is interesting is when she's seen through the lens of men, and you don't want to talk about her relationship with women because then things might get more complicated, because they would be more hostile to her, or heaven forbid she have mother issues over the woman who tried to kill her. I would have thought my greater trauma would have come from my mother trying to drown me and nearly succeeding, other than being upset over someone I never met and who was never a feature of my life. I found it empty, shallow, and just kind of a bit like torture porn. You're just watching a woman be abused over and over, and I guess like there's this element of the uncanny valley because they've made Ana de Armas, sorry, look so much like Marilyn. Like she had like special implants put in her teeth and like a wig, and she has like the hairline recreated. Like it's spot on. So you're just being treated to what is essentially a deep fake of Marilyn Monroe being forced into incredibly horrible situations for what? To show that like there were like her life was bad. Well, some parts of her life were bad, but I don't think it's particularly tasteful or enlightening to insist that her life was just this carnival of misery that didn't stop until, wow, she just took that final step and she was able to free herself from this punishing Ixion's wheel by killing herself. And I'm like, what a horrible way to frame an accidental overdose or suicide, as her one act of agency to take control of herself was to end her life. The real life person, her life wasn't over. That's why her death is a tragedy, because she had much more to give and to do
because she
and
was so young.
yeah. But in here it's almost positive, like, oh, she's finally free from this life of trauma that she's been forced to lead. And I'm like, that's what kind of messaging is that? But you've recreated the way that her body was found, perfectly. Golly gosh, what an achievement. But they're not exploiting the image of Marilyn Monroe. That's us. That's us, her public. Like, I think one of the only good scenes that I liked was when she was doing a paparazzi walk at a premiere, and the faces of people were like, the eyes and the mouths were distorting and just becoming like these inhuman figures just hungering for her. And I go, that's a really good visual image to express the impact of fame on her as a person. But you can't have that messaging while also continuing the trend of exploiting her body and her image for monetary gain and pleasure.
Would you consider yourself a sort of Marilyn fan, or?
I think like most teenage girls go through a phase of like where they really identify with Marilyn Monroe, and they're like, ah, she was troubled and tragic just like me. And I read like a lot of biographies and insane conspiracy theory books about how she supposedly died because she was just so tragic. And I think seeing anyone's life as just being a tragedy is it's a really reductive, dehumanizing way of looking at her life, because her life wasn't a tragedy. There were horrible, awful things that happened to her, but she was also a girl who grew up in abject poverty and became the most famous film star in the world. She worked hard for that. She was one of the first actresses in Hollywood to break free from the studio system. It's amazing. Did sum up someone's life just by the most horrifying, a really hollow and empty way to look. Oh, your camera's gone. Whoa. It's just a really hollow and empty way to experience anyone's life, and to make their point about her fame destroying her, they had to only show the worst parts of her life and plus some made up bits. because it's not a real biopic, obviously, it's based on a novel. And I just, like, what does it add to our cultural understanding of her as a person and as a figure? But it's going to go great at the Oscars because it involves transformations and crying, and it's about Hollywood. It's almost like the film doesn't want you to like her. It's like they're constantly making up that she's dumb and that she can't act and that she doesn't like anything she does and she doesn't like her career. And okay, so I'm supposed to come out of this thinking that she was stupid and she was a terrible actress, but I should feel bad for her because men abused her? Maybe people are seeing something that I'm just not seeing, but
the question is, do we even need any more
biopics
of Marilyn Monroe? Or is it just time to let
her go?
Yeah.
I
do feel like she wouldn't have the kind of, like, if she had lived, to die of old age, I don't think she would have the kind of lasting, like, pop culture ghoul version of her.
The fact that she died is what made her an icon. Yeah, she was born the same year.
I think she'd still be like,
she'd
still be like a big name. She'd be like Audrey Hepburn,
or Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor is, I think, the best nearest comparison, because they both they made films in the 50s. They're big sex symbols, and then their image became the scandals that they got themselves into.
But I mean, even Liz Taylor isn't like quite that, is she?
But I think that's because I think if she died in like the 60s, there would have been, but she got old.
Yeah, and she was around to say, hey, stop doing stupid things about my life.
Yeah. But I guess there's also a respect for Elizabeth Taylor because she faded out of Hollywood pretty gracefully and sort of became involved in like AIDS activism and charity work. Because Marilyn Monroe, had she not died, she was born in the year of our beloved leader, so she would have been 96. Yeah,
it could have still been alive.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? It's this. I guess that's why they released the film this year, because it was the 60th anniversary of her death. But yeah, I don't think it's possible to have I guess what you could call an honest biopic of Marilyn Monroe, because everyone goes into it with a conception of who she is, and so you're either trying to deconstruct the myth and you might go too far, or you're trying to deconstruct it but also play it straight, which is kind of what Blonde was trying to do. And I don't think you can have an honest, authentic biopic that is removed from the layers that have built up around Marilyn Monroe over the last 60, 70 years. Because there are always people who are going to be upset. And it's never going to be about her as a person, but about how we react to her as a part of pop culture, as a part of Americana, as a part of rising consumer culture and the Hollywood machine and Me Too and the nature of feminism and the development of how women are perceived seen and are both given or denied agency beyond their own spheres.
Mm.
I think I was saying to John the other day, it's kind of like when you watch Citizen Kane for the first time as, oh god, I had a cream slice. It's just bleh. It's kind of like I watched Citizen Kane in university and I couldn't authentically engage with it because I'd heard my whole life people talking about Citizen Kane or seen it parodied or discussed or remade, and I couldn't watch it as if I was watching it for the first time in when it was released, because I could only perceive it through the filter of the so many layers about Citizen Kane that I'd been told my whole life. So I was left watching it and I was thinking, I don't think I like this. But I'm supposed to like this because people have told me how it's the greatest film of all time and how it's had this amount of influence and it created this and it established that.
Kind of like me with Pride and Prejudice. It's like, I know I'm supposed to like it, but it's really boring to me. I'm so sorry.
And I think...
Oh, gonna get angry comments from the Austen fans.
Well. Austen fans versus Bronte fans, what a fight. I think... I don't know whether you can make a good biopic of Marilyn Monroe without either making her this limp, pathetic little girl that she was in Blonde that couldn't defend, that had no way of just even attempting to defend herself, or you go the other way and you like, Marilyn Monroe was the original girl boss. Didn't deal with it, and that would also be horrible and wrong. If I was gonna make a Marilyn Monroe biopic, I would probably center it around like a part of her life, kind of like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is set.
I think doing about the Misfits could be interesting, like you said.
Yeah, because Ma Rainey's Black Bottom it's a bottle. It's a stage play, then made into a film, and it's like a bottle, what you would call a bottle episode for TV, because it's just set on the day where she is in Chicago to do some recordings, and it's like one room. And I think if you were going to do a Marilyn Monroe biopic, if I was going to do one, I would do it about the Misfits. This was her... I can't remember whether it came out before or after Let's Make Love. I think it came out after, but it's like it's her last big iconic film role. It's so iconic the band The Misfits is named after the film. It's Clark Gable's last film. It's the marriage that destroyed... It's the movie that destroys her marriage to Arthur Miller. That film is about, contextually, like within the film, it is about the constructed image of Marilyn Monroe. That's one of the subtexts, and how she's trying to break free from it. And like, yeah, there's your movie. If you're talking about the battle between Norma Jean and Marilyn Monroe, The Misfits is the perfect stage for telling that story. But I guess she wasn't beaten and raped enough in the course of the filming of that movie. Watching her get raped by a studio head, though, that's how you know that this is dynamic and serious. We're telling the story of what probably happened, and we're going to show you in detail. Like, they included that because serious movies are about rape, and you didn't need to You didn't need to show it. All you need to do to imply it is studio head puts hand on ass and you're like, oh no. Outside office door, she comes out looking ruffled and upset and crying. You know what's happened and you don't need to watch it. That's filmmaking. When you let the audience can tell via contextual clues what is happening. It's almost as if cinema is a visual medium and you can use images to tell a story.
It's like I said, how it's difficult to show. I like to figure that because I think sometimes filmmakers try and do a really graphic scene in order to make you feel kind of grossed out.
You know, this movie is about how her body was used against her agency, and you know, we have thought no deeper about this statement that we're making, because then we might stop and realize that we are doing it. But all in all, it's not making me want to read the book, which I think is like I think I read somewhere it's almost 2,000 pages long, and I'm like, oh joy! This is even longer than the film and probably full of even more misery. Just imagining, I can't imagine wanting to do like a psychological retelling of Marilyn Monroe's life, but also just in the least interesting way possible. But, you know, they got Ana de Armas to look just like Marilyn Monroe and they got her to recreate her scenes, and she was so in touch with Marilyn Monroe that she was sure that her ghost was on set with them.
The ghost's too busy haunting Kim Kardashian.
Christ. Marilyn Monroe just can't catch a break this year, can she?
Mm.
Poor woman. Yes. Can't catch a break in her fucking grave because Hugh Hefner bought the one next to her after exploiting her image to found his magazine. Yeah. I think if I hadn't sprained my ankle, I probably would not have watched it. Because why? She never grew older than that 7-year-old who was dropped off at the orphanage. Trapped as a 7-year-old forevermore. The sexiest of 7-year-olds as she became a full-grown adult.
The sexy baby.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, she's like, yeah, she's a sexy baby. She is the sexiest of baby lamps. Just there, a prop in every scene. I don't know. People are probably going to rush and tell me that I'm ignoring all the incredibly deep psychological messaging, to which I say it is not deep to have a woman with daddy issues beg men to be her daddy. It's just not that deep.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't seen like a lot of praise of this movie.
I found it weird. I read a review of it on Pajiba, and I normally really rate their film criticism, but after watching this, I'm like, did Netflix show me a different movie? Do they just make a different version of Blonde as like some elaborate long con that they have with me?
Dark Netflix, show me the forbidden good version of Blonde.
Show me the forbidden version. But so Blonde, do not rate it. Do not like it. It makes me think of Ryan Murphy's Hollywood, which was also an empty and vapid reimagining that had no real depth into how it explored the persona of fame and celebrity. I think the Marilyn Monroe, wherever your ghost is in this world, apparently on set watching them faithfully recreate the method in which you killed yourself and pose Ana de Armas. Just so, you deserve better, original girl boss. You deserve better than this shit.